Hello again. In the previous episode I was looking at the wheel bearing fitment and the outer fulcrum shafts. Now I need to get right into the guts of the rear suspension and start reassembling from that. That means the frame, and inside the middle of that of course sits the differential and things mount from that. So that's where I need to go to next. The next stage of the rebuild is going to start getting heavy very quickly. So I'm going to do it on the floor. Before we go any further, I'd like to draw your attention to this rebuilt differential. It was done by a company called Simply Performance, who are based in Surrey. So they've taken it, completely stripped it, and replaced some of the clutch pack because the plates were looking worn. New bearings, new seals, all replated fixings. The cast brackets here for the mounting of the calipers, those have been replated and lock wired in. Machined the face here that the brake disc mounts to. I did actually ask them for it to be painted in red oxide, and then a good friend of mine who's an expert on E-Type said no, a car of this vintage would actually be black. Carefully masked it up and resprayed it in black. They do several of these a week, and it's one area where I wanted to make sure that this was done once and done right. I could have done it myself, but it would have taken a lot longer, and I'd much rather someone with a keen eye for the detail was doing this. At the moment it's dry. That's a good thing because this needs to be turned upside down anyway during the rebuild process. So that's in place. I've got these replated, tapered bolts. I can lock wire these in later, but just get this in position first, and then I'll turn it over. It's already becoming a bit heavy. Right, now I need to start offering up these fulcrum shaft brackets. So these are fitted with different length bolts. So obviously because the difference in thickness of this bracket, the shorter one goes in here, the longer one goes in there. And before I tighten these up and lock wire them in, I've just remembered that there were shims behind these to the differential originally. So I've measured the original shims that were in pretty grotty state, but there was enough to get a good measurement of. And it came to 15 thousandths of an inch. So these shims that I bought in preparation are 5 thou each. So if I drop in 3 of these behind there, that should give me the clearance I need to replicate what was there before. With those shims in place, what I've done is a dry run of getting the fulcrum shaft through here, because obviously the position of this and the hole centre there relative to the frame is dictated by those shims, and fortunately this has gone through without too much trouble, so that's a really good sign that I've got it set up correctly. Another thing worth pointing out is the frame bows out. So what I've done is I've used this tow rope here, basically just to squeeze those ends of the frame in together so that it helps get the holes aligned. So we're going to torque up these bolts to 55 foot-pounds and lock wire between them so that they don't come undone. So to do locking wire properly, these pliers massively help. If you squeeze them, that part of the handle bends, and then you can pull that down and it locks the jaws in place. 2 pieces of wire locked in the jaws. You then spin it by pulling this here, and the whole lot basically winds around, around, around. So you start off with a piece of wire that's just over 2 times the length of the distance between the 2 bolt heads. So now I'll feed it through the one at this end and use the pliers to pull it back round because it's quite tight in there. So with that wrapped round there, on this side, I'm now going to clamp these 2 pieces of wire together slightly further than this bolt head, because basically that'll compress slightly as it's twisted. And then just pull. Go too far and it will snap, so you need to watch out for that. But that's about right for that side. Maybe just another pull or 2, and that's pretty good at that end. Okay, so I've swapped over sides, so I want this wire to go through here. So of course undoing it is that way, so I want it to react against that. Pull the wire through. In fact, that's a bit messy. I'm just going to take that back out again and do just a few more twists just to make it nice and neat. Out again. There we go. Right, that wire goes through there. Pull it tight, and then this one wraps around here, and then I tighten them up together again. Okay, lock them together. Okay, so don't want to go too far and break it. Now I'll just snip this off, and so that it doesn't catch anyone's fingers, bend the end round, make it nice and tidy and safer. There we go. So I'm now setting up the outer fulcrum shaft with all of the distance pieces, bearings and everything as shown here. I've had to take the outer fulcrum shaft and the hub off this end as well, because what I've realised is by putting it in there, I couldn't get access to the bolt in here for the radius arm that then goes out that way. So I need to get these bearings and knock them in. It's got little marks on the outside here. Those go on the outside face according to the workshop manuals. And I flipped it over to the other side. Okay, so I can now put the bearing tube in the middle, and then on the outside of that goes a thrust washer, a seal, and then a seal retainer goes on the outside. Then we've got the outer thrust washer, that's this big one here. And basically the same gets repeated on the inside of both of these and on the outside there. Okay, so I'm now going to offer up the low wishbone, just making sure that the radius arm is pointing the same way as the differential output, and the grease nipples are on the, well, in this case pointing up because it's upside down, so that's the right way round. So I'm going to offer up that there and then push the, what I'm going to use is the dummy shaft here through, and then knock it through almost all the way, and then the other fulcrum shaft that's going to stay in is going to be knocked back through from that side. So with the dummy shaft almost all the way through now, I've now got the bearing spacer, a shiny bit on the end here, on which I can put the seals and the distance pieces. I've now got to a point where I've got this side done, and this shaft is just beginning to poke through. So using that small gap, I can then put the seal, the distance pieces and the thrust washer in there. So those have gone in place now and they're sitting on the bearing tube. Now I just need to get the big thrust washer in and get the shaft in before it pops out. So before I get too far, obviously as this comes through, I need to get the distance piece here, which is this one there, ready to go in. So now I need to withdraw that enough to be able to get this tube in as well. When this came off, it was quite a tight fit. See the paint thickness. Okay, so there's my gap. So I'm struggling to get this gap here big enough to get this thrust washer through, so I'm just going to try and lever it open and hope that so I don't drop everything else out in the process. There we go. I can tuck from this side through, that's coming through easily. So this side's a little bit easier because you can flex the frame to move that out of the way. Fingers underneath. Good, finally. Right, so that's all the way through. This is pivoting nice and freely. Now I just need to get it and torque it up. So now the fulcrum shaft's all the way through. I want to make sure I equalise the thread showing either side through these locking nuts. So I've put two on this side so I can then tighten up this one here. So you can see that there's a reasonable amount of thread poking through, and I just want to make sure that that's nice and even, and then torque it all up to 55 pounds-foot. That's that one. Okay. So with both of these grease nipples in place, I'll now set about greasing them and filling these bearings up with fresh grease. So on this side, I'm going to use the damper mounting shaft because it's the same diameter as the fulcrum shaft as the dummy shaft. With the lower wishbone in place now, it's a question of getting the radius arm in. The reason for that is that the special bolt that goes through here is trapped once you've got the hub in place, so you have to put the radius arm in place before the hub. Okay, so that's through. I'll be able to tighten this up with a nut shortly. So you can see now that I've tightened up this bolt that it's sunk into this recess here in the wishbone. So the bottom wishbone's in place and torqued up and greased, and the radius arm's in place now. I'm going to get the bottom plate in place and bolt that on too. So I've got 8 bolts with a new spring washer to fit into the brackets of the fulcrum shafts here. And then around the outside there are 6 of these same bolts, but with a locking nut that go to the frame to attach all that together. Having now fitted the bottom plate with fresh fixings, it's all looking rather smart, but I've realised that the grease nipples that I had fitted were actually just clashing a tiny bit with the bottom plate, so I've reverted to some plain old straight grease nipples in there. With the IRS flipped over the right way, it's really beginning to look good again. First job I'm going to do is put the locking wire in these bolts in the top of the differential. They need to be done up to 75 foot-pounds or 104 Newton meters. Right, so I now need to get the brake disc in and get the half shaft in. So to do that, I'm going to put the whole lot on its back. In order to protect the frame and the radius arm here, I've put in some pipe lagging and just taped it on loosely. Right, but this now on its back, I'll offer up, first of all, the brake disc. See properly. There we go. So the freshly machined flange on the output shaft of the differential will make that a really good smooth fit. Then I've got these shims that I've kept from before because they're in good condition. Those set the camber angle for the rear wheel. So, okay, there's been a small amount taken off that flange, but that should be about right there. Then it's the half shaft itself. Now that's all secured in place with these metal Philadas nuts. So in effect, those are metal locking nuts. So I wouldn't reuse these. They're quite expensive, but it's really worth replacing those because it's safety critical. Getting it all tightened up. Okay. I've now got the half shafts in with the metal locking nuts torqued up on both sides. So what I'm going to do is put it back on its bottom, but transfer it onto this wheel dolly so I let the suspension droop either side and actually move it around because it's really going to get even heavier now. With the frame supported on the dolly now and the lower wishbones hanging down there, I can look to build up the springs and dampers and get them fitted, and then I'll be getting the hub carrier on the end here, which will complete the suspension. So I'm starting the spring and damper assembly for the IRS at the moment, and as you can see I've got 3 done. I've got the old ones here as reference. So the first thing to do is extend the damper in and out a couple of times so you can check that there aren't any damp spots in it. So that seems to be working fine. There's quite a lot of effort. So you first of all put on the shield here, slips over there. Then we've got the seating ring, and then I'm going to drop it all upside down onto here. Next goes the spring. Obviously this is all about compressing the spring so that the damper then pops up, and you've got another seating ring at the top, 2 metal collets that go in place and lock it all into position on the compressed spring. With a bit of fiddling, 1 completed spring and damper assembly. Right, with the spring and damper assembly is now made up, I can offer them into position. Try and make sure that the top and bottom are in alignment with each other, and feed it into the gap. Levering to get it into the right position. Now, top tip with this is to fit the bolt from the inside, because if you ever want to swap the springs and dampers without having to drop the whole frame, if you put the bolt in from this side, you won't be able to get the bolt out because of where it's because the body and the car's in the way. With the damper refitted, I can now get the big washer on the bottom and get the self-locking nuts tightened up to hold them in place. In order to get the same amount of thread either side of this shaft, I'm doubling up on the nut on this side and then tightening this. I'll take the nut off afterwards. Alright, there we go. Equal amount of thread on each side. Nice and tidy. It's now time to get the hub back on. So 2 key things I need to check before doing that is one, that the hole in the spline shaft here aligns with the hub, because I've got to put the split pin through to hold the castellated nut on. And of course the second one is, because these splined hubs are handed, I need to make sure this is the correct one. So this is the left hand side of the car, because I can see the radius arm pointing forwards there, and this is the left hand spinner, so I've checked that already. At this stage, a small amount of grease onto the splined shaft won't hurt at all. So hopefully getting the right spline to get that castellated nut in place. Feed that in. Okay, yep, I can see through there. And then get this, feed this in to the yoke. It should be quite a tight fit. Okay, right, that's gone straight through. We're talking this up to 55 pounds-foot. Okay, so I left the right angle grease nipple out of here at the moment, and I haven't greased the hub because it's so vulnerable, that grease nipple, that it's worth waiting right until the last minute to do that. At this point too, I need to offer up this thick washer that goes on the splined shaft here. Okay, I can see through where the split pin's going to go. That's about right now. I need to worry about how tight it's going to be in a bit, but that'll do for now. With both hubs now fitted, I've pretty much rebuilt the suspension. There's a few detailed bits and pieces, such as the mounts that hold onto the car, the anti-roll bar. I've got to torque up the hub nuts. I've got to grease the fulcrum shafts in here, but that's all bits and pieces. The bulk of it's done. Of course, what's missing from here is the brakes. Many thanks for watching. Please join me next time where I'll be completing the IRS rebuild.